All right, everyone's being brought in from the waiting room. Thank you for joining. I'm going to give just like another minute or two to allow people to join in before we jump in. This is the Gaining Competitive Advantage as a Non-Traditional Applicant session in Med School Week. Excited to meet you all. My name's Jeremy. I'll hold off just for a minute here before we get started. Let people trickle in. Okay. I think we're ready to get rolling here. Well, thank you all again for joining. This is a jam-packed week. I know. I'm sure you've all enjoyed a lot of different types of sessions. This one is really tailored to the non-traditional applicant, and we'll kind of dive into that in this brief session and how we define that, how it can really be defined in a lot of different ways. I'm here to tell you that being a non-traditional applicant is a huge enhancement to your resume, to your application in general. And when I coach different applicants from different backgrounds, I really try to help bring out exactly how non-traditional they are in their application, all their different documents, so whether it be their experiences, their personal statement, their secondary application. We really highlight it, and we tend to walk through in advance in a lot of different types of scenarios how to interview as a non-traditional applicant, because it really changes the landscape depending on how you want to approach the interview. And so we'll kind of dive into all that. And by the way, I'm very open to questions throughout this session. I would ask if you put them in the chat. Amanda and I will help to kind of facilitate the question and answer. There is a specific point in this session where I'd like to pause and just specifically answer questions, because I feel like a lot of times your question could be on the minds of many other people in the session, and it could be very helpful just to hear something out loud and for me to try to explain my perspective. And I will also ask you to unmute if there's like a follow-up of that question. So anyways, let's get started. This is the session you're in. You've been to a lot of different sessions this week. Just wanted to introduce myself a little bit. Here's a QR code to my profile on Leland, but I mean, I've been through a few different types of trainings, as you can tell. I really started my undergraduate training, immersed in the sciences, right, in the biology, biomedical science, microbiology. I was at the University of Hawaii and BYU Hawaii on the island of Oahu, and that's where my passion for healthcare really ignited. And I realized that I really loved research too. So I was trying to like strike this balance between like clinical training as well as research training. So you can see, like, I was accepted, straight out of undergrad to the Mayo Clinic School of Medicine in Rochester, Minnesota. And it was really my top school on my list. I applied to about a dozen programs, was accepted to 8 of them. And Mayo was actually accepted off the wait list. So I have some experience just kind of navigating that, purgatory space when you're like on a wait list and you're holding on to other acceptances, and how do you negotiate and kind of continue to maintain interest both from the school and from your side. And so that's something that I coach a lot of my mentees or my clients on Leland about. But really that led to me pursuing medicine, but also finding ways to supplement my training that I felt like were deficient. Since I was so involved in the sciences, I realized I knew nothing about business. Healthcare is a big business, so I enrolled in an evening MBA, full time, but it was from like 6 to 10 p.m. 3 nights a week at the University of Utah. During my PhD training, which was also at the University of Utah in Biomedical Engineering, and I actually studied in my PhD the genetics of cleft lip and cleft palate disorders, in babies when they're born. And my long-term goal is to be a surgeon that addresses these anomalies in children. And I realized that if I'm going to be operating on these babies in their mouths and around their teeth, I should probably know something about the oral cavity. So I was allowed to enroll in dental school during my PhD training. I know it's a long story, but I guess this is just a window into the fact that I am really eager and willing to help people in a lot of different admissions avenues. And for medicine, I think that the more unique that you can make your profile, the more you're going to stand out from the thousands of other applicants at all these different programs. I was very blessed to get into a very competitive program that, looks at more than just the numbers, honestly. And I think that I try to highlight how non-traditional backgrounds can really make you stand out beyond just the numbers, right? Because everyone's going to have high numbers, like everyone in the MD world applying. I coach a lot of people on the DO side as well. Like it's such a large spectrum of medical school candidates. So anyways, this is me. Sorry to ramble about that for a minute, but now I'd like to just kind of lay out some definitions, some like foundation of what we would consider a non-traditional applicant, right? I mean, it can mean a lot of different things. I applied to medical school. I started at age 24. So I guess I was a little bit older than, I might have been right at the mean or the median age, but I had classmates that were 21, 22. I had classmates that were 35. So I mean, it's a really broad range that we can define. Race, ethnicity, obviously cultural and religious background, but really the resume of experiences is really what I feel translates into a true like non-traditional applicant, someone who has like lived some life outside of academics, someone who has additional skill sets and certifications. That's great too, but really the truth is that non-traditional is hard to define, and nowadays a non-traditional applicant is actually more common, if that makes sense. Like it's less and less common to just jump right out of high school into undergrad and then right out of undergrad into med school. It's becoming more the norm to take a bit of a deviation or a supplemental journey on your path toward becoming a doctor. And so that's what I try to help applicants realize, is that they are not only competing with people who are going straight through the academic pipeline, but now like they're really competing with people who are also intentionally looking to supplement their resume with additional experiences like research, like service opportunities, volunteerism. There's so much that you can do. But anyways, that's kind of the framework for what non-traditional means, so that we're all on the same page. But really, medical school admissions is all about finding like the diamond in the rough, right? Like they're looking at thousands of applications. You have to have something inspiring that like pulls at their heartstrings on your application that really makes you just stand out above the rest. To give you an example, I'm trying to remember the exact metrics here, but when I was accepted to the Mayo Clinic, it was like exactly at like a 1% acceptance rate. So for every 100 applicants, one was going to be accepted at most. And it's just really hard to stand out, I mean, there's no way around it. But when you are putting together your application, there are some kind of key points to keep in mind. That you should really know this line between humility and confidence, right? Because especially in the interview process, but even before that, when you're crafting your essays with your coach, this is something that I really work closely with my clients about, is that like you want to give that 5, 10, 15-year vision on paper. Like what inspired you to do this? How are you going to succeed when you're there? What is driving you forward? What do you envision for yourself? But in doing that, I think a lot of applicants have a tendency to come across as a bit too arrogant, to be quite honest. And we see this on the admissions side. I've been a part of admissions committees. I'm on one right now. And when we review applications, when applicants talk about themselves and their vision, it's a very fine line, to where like you can definitely tell on paper, even before you meet someone, just how they see themselves, and how highly or humbly they may see themselves as an individual, as a human being, and as an applicant. And that really speaks volumes, because you want someone who is capable but not cocky, not overly confident. And so being able to contextualize your unique experiences, which are truly unique and advantageous in this application process, into how they're going to help you in your future career without coming across as overly zealous or too confident to the point where it could detract from that team mentality, which is very present in medicine, which is very, very critical in medical school, because most of your learning happens in groups. And so, finally, that the final point is something that I really try to hammer home with my clients as well, that everything that we write, every single line in your personal statement, it needs to lead to the next line. It kind of like builds, it crescendos and decrescendos, and everything is connected to the preceding and the subsequent line in your essay. And there has to be like a beginning, middle, like a climax, and then a resolution. It's really like a mini story that you are writing to captivate the reader and to help them understand what type of applicant you are and what type of doctor you want to be. So anyways, that these are just kind of some of my own ramblings, but this is the part of the session which I like the most. I'd like to open this up to specific, like targeted questions that may be on your mind as non-traditional applicants in this space. I'd love to see them in the Q&A or in the chat. I've got it open right now on my screen, and I'll kind of pre-read them and I'll read them out loud so that we can all kind of enjoy each other's own thought process. But I'm happy to give recommendations. I'm happy to ask you to unmute if you can kind of elaborate on any questions. So please feel free to send them over. And don't be shy, like any question's a good question. It's okay. Excellent. Okay, Mega says, how should we craft our personal statement? Okay. I mean, that's a big question, right? I think, one way to answer this initially is to really focus in on 2 or 3 experiences maximum. Like you don't want this to be like listing off your resume or your experiences section of your application. Like you don't want to repeat stuff. Like I would prefer that your personal statement be like a standalone document that highlights some critical moments in your life that like really drove you into medicine, give some windows into who you are as an individual, like the type of character that you have, and then how that is going to propel you into a meaningful career in medicine. So I really tell people to like really focus on those first few lines, because usually when someone's reading your personal statement on the admission side, it takes them about 5 to 10 seconds. They've done studies on this or something. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've seen this, but I can say anecdotally this is true too. Like it takes about 5 to 10 seconds to know if that personal statement is going in the trash or if they're going to keep it on the side. And so like you really have to hook them with those first few lines. And then once they're hooked, they're going to want to see how it resolves. How does this story end? Like where is Mega going to go with all of this? And so there's a lot we could get into with that question, but I think that's my initial response. And I'd love to follow up with you on an individual basis, Mega. Thank you for asking. I'm gonna kind of see what other questions are rolling in. Okay, Kyra put in a nice question here. Can you talk about wording that stood out to you as too cocky when reading someone's application versus just confident? Yeah, this is a great question to ask, and yeah, I would want to know some clarification too after that statement. So here's one rule of thumb. Like when you are, I see this a lot with first drafts of personal statements that I read and then I help kind of rework with my clients, is that a lot of times there's kind of just this tendency when we write to, I don't think it's necessarily purposeful all the time, but we tend to like explain things when we write, maybe to show that we understand something. For example, something that I see a lot with med school personal statements is that an applicant will talk about like shadowing a doctor and like, oh, I saw all these great things, like seeing this cardiologist with this patient and talking about cardiovascular disease. And then they will proceed to like explain a certain pathology that they saw with that cardiologist, like explaining the biology of it, as if like the person on the other side of the admissions committee, like the person reading it, would like doesn't understand it. And even if it's just a an unintentional, sentence here or there, that comes across as very like condescending to the admissions member, because it's like, oh, they haven't even come to med school yet, but they are explaining to me what this disease does to the body. That's kind of weird. And so, yeah, that's kind of a silly example, but it's actually like a very common. I'd say like 80% of the personal statements that I read before I like help with drafting it, because I'm very hands-on. Like I draft it with my clients, like one-on-one. We have a Google Doc open together, and like they tell me what they want to say, and I'll like literally type it for them, and then we'll edit it together. And so, like before I do that, if they've drafted it, I always see this. And so I would just keep that in mind as like a rule of thumb. Like if you're making a statement that you think the doctor on the other end already knows, just delete that statement. Like this should be about you. This shouldn't be about like anything else. It should really just be a window into your soul, into your brain, into the type of person you want to be. So hopefully that kind of addresses it, Kyra. Aaron Golden, this is kind of a niche question, but this does apply to someone like me, at least in the MSTP. So our admissions committee is concerned about admitting older students in MSTP program since the training is already so long. I'm sure this will be kind of program dependent, but I can at least tell you from my own experience at admissions process, because I did apply MSTP as well as MD only. I kind of dual applied. And at my med school, the 35-year-old that I mentioned, and actually two others in their early to late 30s were the MD PhDs in the class. And so I think in a lot of ways, you kind of have to have those extra years of experience under your belt to get into an MSTP that's funded, because they're really looking for very specific type of candidates, and it really requires you to have lived some life, beyond just going to undergrad, the typical 4-year path. Usually you had to have like produce something pretty impactful or meaningful. Not always, but I mean, in a lot of cases, they're looking for someone who's walked some life. And so I would say no to that. Like older does not, yeah, I have never seen that as like as a hesitation to the admission side. I think it's more of like what you have done and what your vision is. And, age is just a number, right? At least that's what I tell myself. Let's see. Chica said, do gap years make you non-traditional with how common they are becoming? I mean, yeah, that's a good point. Like that's kind of what I was alluding to at the beginning, is that the new norm is to be non-traditional, right? So like the definition of non-traditional is kind of this fluid thing. And like I think it's changing year by year. But I think we're kind of going based off of the old rhetoric of what a non-traditional applicant is, which would be like any deviation from like the 4 years of high school to 4 years of undergrad to 4 years of med school, back to back to back. So yes, it's definitely becoming more common, and it's almost the new norm. I would argue that it's less common now and less traditional in a sense to just go right through school. But we're going off of the old definitions here. Do gap years hurt your chance of being accepted to med school? Caroline asks. Absolutely not. As long as they were meaningful gap years, if you can like justify them. I think if you were just touring Europe for 12 months, then that, I mean, you might be able to swing some sort of like, cultural renaissance that you were going through. But really gap years can only enhance your resume, because it's extra years of, lived experience, and hopefully you were productive. Maybe you did some research, maybe you worked clinically or humanitarian aid, something, intriguing like that. And I'm sure that could be, only help for you. Sorry, I'm just looking at some other kind of like high yield questions, and I would encourage, if I don't answer your question, please DM me. Like I'll be giving you the direct link to my Leland platform, and like anyone who's on this session can have a 50% off for a first hour of coaching with me. So I really want to make this accessible to you all. Okay, Diana asked, if we took 3 to 4 gap years, will schools think we took too much time off and want us to do a post-bac and reapply? Okay, that's a nice question. That kind of follows up to our other point on gap years. In my experience, as long as these were 3 to 4 years of kind of meaningful experiences, And that can mean a lot of different things. It doesn't have to be professional. It could have been like a family leave. You could have been taking care of somebody. You could have had a kid. There's a lot of things that I think can fall under the umbrella of meaningful. I think they just want to see that you're driven, that you have purpose and a vision for yourself, right? And that can be evidenced in the way that you craft your personal statement to then like explain what that gap in your resume is. Like if there was no like work experience or educational experience during those 3 to 4 years, that's okay. It's not the end of the world. You just have to be able to or explain exactly why that happened. And I can help you do that. Like that's kind of a key thing that I think a coach can help you with. Jason asks, can you talk about when it's better to do post-bac versus masters, or if it's even worth it? He's junior and undergrad, and he doesn't have time to finish prereqs, and GPA is in the highest. Okay. Um, so yeah, that's a key question that a lot of people run into, because most of the time, like a post-bac fellowship, like for example, I did my PhD at the NIH. I still work at the NIH as a postdoc now, and a lot of people come to the NIH in Bethesda, Maryland, to do what's called a post-baccalaureate fellowship. So you spend 1 to 2 years working in a lab, getting a lot of mentorship on how to apply to med school, how to be successful, how to be a clinician scientist if you want to be. And you don't get a degree out of that, but you get a huge stamp on your resume for being at the NIH, the world's leading biomedical research institution. And I think that that's a really valuable thing, but it kind of depends on your goals, right? If you're looking for something, kind of specialized, like you want a master's in like bioinformatics, so you can like analyze, big, data sets for healthcare or research purposes. Like there are certainly instances where a master's degree can be helpful. Or if you want to do an MBA and kind of like, lean into that when you apply to med school, that you want to like kind of help shape, the future, business of medicine. Like there are definitely a lot of instances where you can justify it. But I think for the sole purpose of getting, accepted into med school, if that's like your unified goal, I think I would go for like the most targeted approach, because if you go and get a master's degree in something that isn't really related to medicine, you're going to have to really back that up and justify why you did that. So, and it comes through in the interview and even in the application process. I think that admissions committees can tell when applicants aren't sincere. I've talked about this a lot with my clients. Like you really need to be sincere and true to yourself, because your true colors shine through. It's really obvious on the other side of the table. And so we can just, it's just kind of cringy. We can like tell when someone is like blowing smoke. And we really I really encourage people to lean into what they're truly passionate about, what they truly care about. Yeah, hopefully that answered your question, but both can be good essentially, but you just have to do what actually speaks to you. We've addressed some of these questions. How do we get mentored by you for personal statements? I would be interested. Oh, well, I'll give you the link at the end. Yeah, hang tight. And I actually think Amanda dropped some sort of link, or she will, towards the end, of how you can book a session with me. So I'll definitely, I would love to work with any of you for personal statement crafting, experiences, anything on the application I can help with, interview prep, all of the above. Let's see. There's a question by Irian. What about gap years that are spent, that are spent in healthcare but are not considered clinical work? Totally fine, in my opinion. Yeah, I think that they are, again, you can just really explain it. And, healthcare is a huge industry, right? Like so many different moving pieces. So it's never just about the clinical work. Like that's a huge part of it. It's probably the most important part, but there's so many different cogs in the wheel that help it spin and succeed. And so, yeah, like totally all sorts of different ways that you can gain experience. Hillary asked, is it possible to still submit your application this cycle while awaiting to complete your last classes during the summer? Absolutely. Yes, I did this. I applied, as early as possible, because that was the advice I was given. And I fully, agree with that advice based on my experience. But you do not have to have every single class, finished. Like it's good if it's like planned in your classes or your transcripts, however you're listing it in the application, to like have it written somewhere that you are going to take a certain course or that you're registered maybe. But you do not have to have it done yet. Like that's fully okay. And you can actually give updates to the admissions committees of specific schools when you do finish. Like if you get an A in that class and it's like halfway through the cycle, you can absolutely let them know, like, hey, done with biochem, got an A, I just wanted to let you know. And so anyways, that's my opinion there. We're coming up towards the end of I'm going to answer one more question. Let's see. Sorry, I want to pick a good one. Let's see. Keith asked, does not having research experience on my resume drastically hurt my application? I've been an RN for the last 5 years, so it's a clinical experience. She does it. Okay. Not at all. I think that research can be handled in a couple different ways, depending on, what your goals are, right? There are a few MSTP questions in here. I'd love to work with any MSTPs, by the way. That's a very unique application process that is very different from the MD only path. Research is critical for those folks doing the MSTP. Like there's no way around that. Like that is what they're buying, they're selling their souls into. It's like the research, physician scientist research track. But as an MD student, you need to at least be able to critically evaluate, peer-reviewed research and understand how that evidence from the literature translates into clinical care, right? I mean, I'm sure you know this, Keith, you're an RN, but I would not lose sleep over a lack of research. I would definitely get something to like check the box, right? You got to check the box on all these things. Research is one that you could really lean into and you could like overemphasize it. It could be like the crux of your application and that would look really nice. Or you could at least do the minimum so that like you have something with your name on it and like something that like someone that can vouch for you in the research space. That's always going to be, preferred. You just don't want it to be like this black hole on your application. But I wouldn't lose sleep over not having a lot of research experience. Basically, that's my take home. Everyone, please reach out to me. These are just some final thoughts. Thank you all for the questions. That was really nice. I hope you gained something from hearing those questions from different people. Honestly, in my biased opinion, because I was kind of non-traditional, am kind of non-traditional, they can really be the most successful applicants. And this is a huge, I think, need that Leland has addressed very nicely by bringing in people like myself to help non-traditional applicants to craft their application, because it's so important that you have like a resounding theme and story. I saw a question in there that asked about this. So tacking on one more answer, yes, it's super important, because otherwise you're going to be like picking out these random experiences from all over the place. If you're 30 years old, you've lived all this life, you have all these different experiences, but you need it to flow in like a logical, seamless way that leads to the end goal of being a physician. Whatever vision you have for yourself, you need to articulate that. And honestly, you have all the tools at your disposal here. Leland has really filled a niche in the market, and I hope that you take advantage. So here's a QR code from Amanda. You can scan this QR code on the left to book our session. This is the discount code that's actually available for 1 week from today, where you can book something with me. Send me a message. If the scheduling doesn't work perfectly, we can work something out, but we can message on the Leland app. But I just want to thank you all for joining this session. Thank you so much for the questions, and let me know how it could be helpful to you, please.